As they say, retribution is best served cold. However, retaliation doesn't always occur. The expression of rage or even words. Occasionally, it's a silent moment, a judgment that is so straightforward but so disastrous that it upends an entire sport to its core. Caitlin Clark didn't view retaliation as a furious dispute or a fierce retaliation on social media. Her retaliation consisted of a single word and the choice to leave a agreement that would have paid her more than $1 million for playing basketball for just 8 weeks. On paper, it appeared to free cash. In actuality, though, it was the ultimate retaliation. Due to that deal was more than just a proposal, it was a lifeline given by the same man who once ignored her, disparaged her, and attempted to portray her as only another name in a large list of stars. He said he had seen it previously. And when she declined, it wasn't only turned down. It was humiliation meted out to the one person who never imagined he could be humbled. This is not merely an athletic tale. It goes beyond statistics, awards, or highlight reels. This is about authority, about an elderly guard that controlled women's basketball for decades before realizing that they are no longer the center of the sport. It has to do with an ego so exaggerated that it prevented a legend from seeing the future that was right in front of him. Additionally, it concerns the time that Future concluded that she was not in need of him. Nor for approval, nor for a chance, and not for a paycheck, for sure. Because basketball isn't the only factor in Caitlin Clark's success. It's about changing the equilibrium of power. It is about people who believed they could hold on to the torch forever having it torn from them. Moreover, the manner in which it took place, quietly, ruthlessly, with a single, well-timed rejection that cost millions and destroyed a whole heritage. Without a doubt, this wasn't a coincidence. Every insult, every disparaging remark, every backhanded this moment was brought about by a compliment. The best part is that Clark never needed to make any plans. Retaliation. She only needed to continue being herself and setting new records. Continue to disprove everyone until the man who disregarded her when she was a teenager returned crawling with a contract. And on that day, she didn't even pause. So fasten your seatbelts because the tale you are about to hear is more than a game, greater than a rivalry, and greater than a salary. The untold tale of Caitlin Clark's failure to simply refuse the league. She destroyed one of basketball's most powerful empires. Strong characters with just one terrible word. Every tremendous retaliation. The story starts with an error. Furthermore, Geno Auriemma's error wasn't a poor play decision or a difficult defeat. It was much worse. It was a decision and a blind spot that would haunt him in ways he could never have predicted. As you can see, prior to Caitlin Clark becoming the face of women's basketball, prior to the sold-out stadiums and the unprecedented TV ratings and the Rookie of the Year award, she was merely a little child with aspirations. Like a lot of young hoopers, that UConn was the four-letter representation of the dream. Caitlin acknowledged it herself in interviews. UConn was more than a program. The program was the cause. The location. Every girl growing up aspired to be the dream factory, the empire, and the dynasty, where legends like Breanna Stewart, Maya Moore, and Diana Taurasi were created. It was the summit of the mountain for Clark. She previously stated, "I loved UConn. I thought they were the coolest place on earth." Thus, the route appeared clear when it came time to recruit her. The most exceptional offensive ability she has. Generation, knocking on the door of the best recruiter in sports history. It ought to have been a perfect fit. In a basketball paradise. However, it wasn't because UConn hardly looked back as Clark turned to face him. As stated by, there was never much interest in Clark herself. Geno's AAU coach made a casual phone call to her crew. There were a few check-ins here and there, but Geno never answered the phone. He never spoke to Caitlin directly. He never spoke to her family. It was an obvious message. He wasn't sufficiently intrigued to bother. And Geno's response to questions about why was a masterclass in conceit. He asserted he didn't want 2 point guards at the same time because he had already made a very early commitment to Paige Bueckers. Equitable. Sufficient on the surface. The portion that converted a straightforward justification into an insult was the kicker, though. Geno proposed. Said Clark ought to have given UConn a call if she truly desired him. Consider that. The most honored recruiter in women's collegiate basketball has a reputation for identifying and securing talent years before anyone else. Otherwise, he shrugged at Caitlin Clark and accused a youngster of not pursuing him more vigorously. It was more than a lost chance. That was disrespectful. The sort you never forget. Because Clark was ignoring her while Geno was keeping a tight eye. And she understood exactly what that meant in her heart. She wasn't their top focus. They didn't pick her as their star. She wasn't UConn to Geno. Content. Thus, the door was shut by the so-called king of women's basketball. In retrospect, he ought to have ripped off the door's hinges to keep it open. Caitlin Clark wasn't simply another potential customer. She was neither the next Diana nor the next Paige. She was something quite different. A supernova that is ready to blow up generations. However, by the time Geno understood, it was too late. Clark selected Iowa, a program devoid of UConn's flags, sans the mystery of UConn, without UConn's history. However, it gave her something. Geno never made an offer. Conviction. And that choice, the fork in the road that led her to Iowa, would alter everything. The sports environment. Because that initial rejection and dismissal would turn out to be the most costly error in history of women's basketball. A mistake quantified not only in victories and defeats. However, UConn's millions of cash, millions of fans, and millions of eyeballs will never return. Most people didn't think Iowa was a good fit for Caitlin Clark. The start of a revolution. It appeared to be a consolation reward to many. Iowa wasn't UConn, after all. It was not a dynasty. Young, it wasn't the place. Stars' dreams of hanging posters on the wall of their bedrooms. But tradition wasn't what Clark was searching for. She was seeking independence, a location where she wouldn't be someone else's backup plan or another celebrity shaped into an already existing system. She was the recruit at Iowa, not simply a recruit. Additionally, she took over of the program right away, something UConn would never have permitted. It began modestly. Stuffed Iowa City gyms, social media highlight reels that go viral. Her logo threes were statements rather than merely shots. Each deep bomb she detonated was a reminder that she was the driving force behind the sport's evolution. Additionally, while Geno was occupied defending his throne, Clark was out there creating her own empire. One bucket at a time. The figures were astounding. Sellouts started to happen often. For Clark's game, entire arenas were transformed into shrines. Games on the road. They had the impression that rock concerts where people flocked to see her magic, even if it meant supporting a different team than their own. Television ratings broke all previous records. Networks that previously disregarded women's basketball quickly put Clark in the spotlight because she wasn't simply attracting spectators but also building a motion. The problem is that none of it happened by mistake. Clark did not falter into the spotlight. She pulled it into being. She didn't require UConn's banners must prove her worth. Geno's approval wasn't necessary for her. She accepted the pieces that Iowa gave her and transformed them into gold. Geno, meantime, saw from far away. And he doubled down rather than acknowledge that he had lost out on the best offensive player of a generation. He opted for conceit over integrity, vanity over modesty. Instead of recognizing. As the sports spokesperson, Clark attempted to minimize her ascent. Attempted to appear as he had previously witnessed it all. Made an effort to persuade everyone that this was nothing new. However, everyone else could observe it. This was novel. Because UConn maintained its waning hegemony. Out there, Clark was redefining the concept of dominance. She was doing more than just winning games. She was rewriting the rules of power, money, and attention in women's basketball. All of a sudden, wearing UConn blue was not a dream for girls. They wanted to wear Caitlin Clark's number in their dreams. And that's Geno was unable to handle this part. Because a player can be dismissed. You are able to minimize her statistics. You can act as though she's just another name. However, what you cannot prevent millions of people from holding on to their faith. Additionally, by the time Clark's beyond Iowa, the empire started to make national and international news. Publicity, and Geno's dismissals were beginning to appear less likely even in the WNBA. Like knowledge and more like resentment. What he used to think was a slight miscalculation was developing into something far more serious. A public reminder. Said he was no longer able to determine who was important in women's basketball. Additionally, the more Clark constructed, the smaller he appeared. Geno remained silent for some while. He may have acknowledged his error. He could have said something like, "Yeah, we missed out, but look at what she's doing. That's special." He might have gained respect for his modesty. But Geno is not one for humility. Rather, he began to speak. Additionally, whenever Caitlin Clark's name was mentioned, the same pattern was seen. A little compliment encased in a beautiful package of dismissal. He would grin, recline, and say things like, when asked about her game, "Kid's fearless. She just plays like a little kid in the driveway, appears. Initially flattering, isn't that right? But pay more attention. Geno believed that Clark was an once-in-a-generation sportsman. She was nothing more than a child having fun. He transformed her genius into something unremarkable and everyday. Additionally, he didn't end there. Whenever someone attempted to place Clark in her own category, he made care to pull her back down into analogies. Again and again, he would turn to Paige Bookers. Paige was just as tough as Clark. If Clark, yes, she made a connection with fans, but Paige also did. The praise was consistently connected to a prompt. In Geno's universe, UConn continued to create stars worth discussing. It wasn't at random. It was planned, a low-key power play, to maintain narrative control. If Clark's achievements might be described as, Geno might continue to act as though he was the kingmaker if there was nothing new. That she. In some way, the players he selected and the dynasty he established were linked to the spotlight. The issue with backhanded compliments is as follows, though. People took notice. Fans took note. Analysts took note. Even other coaches took note. They were able to spot the deception. They observed a man who was unable to provide unadulterated respect without distorting it or interfering with the narrative. And it got worse the more he did it. It appeared. So qualifying were unnecessary for Clark's game. Her performances didn't. Must be counterbalanced by comparisons. She was posting numbers that nobody else had ever saw, shattering records everywhere, and drawing audiences larger than entire expert franchises. However, Geno was still holding on to his throne. He was still making an effort to remind everyone that he was in command. Although it was subtle, it showed everything. Behind the compliments and the grin, there was something different. Unease. The kind that only appears when you become aware that the focus is shifting and you are powerless to stop it. Soon after, the mask entirely slipped. Because those subtle jabs and clever comparisons were no longer sufficient. Geno went from making fun of Clark to punching the folks who stood by her. For some time, Geno's. It was a sophisticated plan. A little comparison here, a little shadow there. Eventually, though, he was unable to contain it. No longer. The praise ceased. The mask fell off. The next thing that emerged was utter annoyance. During a June 2024 interview on Geno Auriemma performed the unimaginable on the Dan Patrick Show. He didn't only discuss Clark, Caitlin. He pursued those who had backed her. Consider that for a moment. This man has won numerous national titles, is a Hall of Fame coach, and is expected to signify the highest level of the sport. Nevertheless, rather than exhibiting elegance or acknowledging the vitality that Clark was referring to women's basketball, he disparaged the movement's core foundation. His remarks were harsh. He made a call. Her fans are naive. Said they lack knowledge, even going so far as to call them so foolish is a disgrace to women's basketball. Why? Due to fans. Dared to think. Because they anticipated that, as a rookie, Caitlin Clark may place among the top 4 in the MVP voting. 4. Not only was that incorrect, but it was also absurd. He didn't think Clark supporters were. They were an issue because they were enthusiastic. And with that, Geno went too far. Could never return on foot. Analysis was no longer the focus of this. It wasn't a coach analyzing the advantages and disadvantages of a player. This was a private matter. This was a clear jab at the millions of new players Clark had attracted to the sport. The children sporting her jersey, the family-packed arenas, and the informal sports. Fans who were captivated by her magic and tuned in for the first time. To be clear, this wasn't merely another coach's viewpoint. Geno Auriemma was this person. When he speaks, people listen, which made his remarks much more hurtful and illuminating. Because by referring to her admirers, not only was he underestimating them, but he was also underestimating her due to his delusions. He was stating, "I'll be proven correct when the dust settles. This hype isn't real. These people don't understand the game." However, this is the delicious part of the narrative. Geno was not shown to be correct. He was demonstrated completely incorrect. Since Caitlin Clark failed to return the applause, she didn't share a mysterious tweet. She refrained from ranting. She didn't have to. She had a far stronger than words. The court. Additionally, her actions on that court didn't merely quiet Geno. It made him feel ashamed. She went on to win Rookie of the Year. She made the WNBA first team. Additionally, she completed the MVP voting. Precisely on the 4th, as her allegedly crazy supporters had foretold. It was more than just a victory for Clark. Geno's credibility was methodically destroyed. Every disparagement, every. Eventually, each haughty soundbite fell apart in the face of truth. These days, the onslaught on the fan seems to be among the worst in sports history. An elderly wise man who previously believed he was the gatekeeper of basketball knowledge. Out of touch, bitter, and exposed. He did it to himself, which is the worst part. Because Clark's achievement served as both communal and personal vindication. For each and every fan, Geno offended, for each child he labeled as deluded, and for each new follower he wrote off as foolish. Additionally, the more Clark flourished, the more noticeable it became. Geno wasn't berating her followers because they were mistaken. They were correct, which is why he was criticizing them. Typically, revenge comes with cacophony, irate remarks, contentious discussions, and public conflicts that take place in the press. However, Caitlin Clark's retaliation was mute. And that quiet was more than Geno Auriemma could possibly express. He insulted her, yet she remained silent. She did not respond to his clap. Fans are being referred to be foolish or naive. She didn't use social media to incite conflict. Rather, she returned to what? Hoop, she's always finished. And the manner she performed changed all of his criticisms into a joke. Due to Gina's dismissal during talk shows, Clark was changing history with her excitement. She was putting up night after night. Numbers that were unmatched by even seasoned pros. 3 long distances from the logo, assists that appeared to belong in highlight reels for weeks, and crossovers that left defenders motionless. She wasn't. She was prospering, barely making it through her rookie season. And when the prizes were announced, they told the tale flawlessly. WNBA First Team, Rookie of the Year. And, most importantly, 4th place in the MVP competition. The precise location of her. She was expected to complete, according to so-called crazy admirers. Can you appreciate its beauty? In that? Without uttering a word, Clark and her admirers destroyed Geno's legitimacy. He referred to them as ignorant. She demonstrated their prophecy. According to him, they didn't comprehend the game. She demonstrated that they were more aware of it than he was. It was nearly lyrical. Each bucket that she was a response. She shattered every record with a clapback. In every area, the fact that it was sold out served as a reminder that the excitement was unfounded. It was the truth. And as she continued to ascend, Geno's remarks matured like milk. What had previously sounded authoritative now sounded like resentment. It felt like insecurity now, instead of wisdom. He attempted to project an image of himself as the gatekeeper, the wise old statesman. However, Clark's game forced him to appear to be the out-of-touch man he truly was, watching the game go by.